Hello everybody and welcome to the Animorphs YouTube channel. My name is Adam, you can call me Thomas. I am an Animorphs fanfiction author and owner of the Animorphs Discord. I also run an Animorphs Twitter page. Links to all three are in the description. Now, today we're going to talk about the plight of the Hork Bajir. Now, Hork Bajir are by far my favourite alien race in the Animorphs series. Now, I don't say species specifically because I've got history and zoology and it triggers me to no end when people say species when they refer to aliens. But that's another matter. But what is it about Hork Bajir? They've got a great design. They've got a compelling story. And they have a generally lovable personality. Yet for all the Hork Bajir's sweetness and generosity on display throughout the series of Animorphs, they're probably the most oppressed race in the books. The Hork Bajir were entirely enslaved for the best part of 3 decades and 2 generations. They lost their whole planet and the peace that they had with it. They were genocided by the race that was supposed to be the good guys. Genocided by the good guys. And after that, they were treated more as cannon fodder, really. Collateral. Nothing to really care about. And during the main brunt of the Animal series, they take the main brunt of the Animorphs attacks on a repeated basis, basically throughout the entire series. Now, before I go on, I just want to say that I've got 2 lights pointing me and they're blinding me, so if I'm sort of squinting down that way, it's because I'm trying to read what the fuck I wrote down. Alright, so what do the Hork Bajir represent? At the start of the series, they're given very little character. They appear, and their whole purpose is to be intimidating. This scary 7-foot-tall monstrosity. They're shock troops. Basically like the stormtroopers from Star Wars. Or, I don't know any other examples, but basically an enemy soldier who's sort of faceless, nameless, and they're only really there to provide action and fear. This, however, changes in book 13. Now, up to that point, there have been 1 or 2, that's basically it, 1 or 2, little references to Hork Bajir being unwilling slaves. Book 13 comes along and we get Jara Hammy and Ket Halpak. The Animorphs rescue them, all as a big plot by the Alarmist. And they learn a lot about these Hork Bajir in a very brief moment in time. They're sort of rushed to learn about them in order to save them. But in that brief space of time, the Animorphs quickly learn that their perception of the Hork Bajir was a little skewed. These are, in fact, peaceful herbivores who, I mean, Jara Hammy said it himself, Andalites kill, Yeerks kill, Hork Bajir die. They are effectively a pawn piece in the chess game that is the Yeerk War. The Animorphs, especially Tobias during that book, express regret, not only at the Hork Bajir they've injured or killed in previous books, but also knowing that in the future they'll be killing Hork Bajir further, because if they didn't, they'd probably lose the war. That's war for you. Despite this, as we go ahead in the Animals book series, even though the Animals will occasionally say we don't like fighting against the Hork Bajir, most of the time they are still seen as those intimidating shock troop, cannon fodder enemies. The Hork Bajir seem to represent an oppressed, forgotten demographic, whose suffering goes largely unheard even by those who are sworn to protect them. But how are the Hork Bajir perceived by the other main alien races in the series? Well, let's start with the easy one, the Yeerks. The Hork Bajir are simple-minded shock troops whose bodies are used as tools and weapons to fight off their perceived enemies. That's basically all that we see the Yeerks care about them. That's it. The Andalites, a little bit different. We see that they definitely consistently feel that the Hork Bajir are just an innately inferior race. I mean, let's face it, they didn't really care about even saving the Hork Bajir at the start in Hork Bajir Chronicles. And the only time they did start to care was when it became obvious that it would be to their own benefit to care. And even then they just tried to nuke the buggers. The Animorphs, it becomes a bit more interesting. How do the Animorphs perceive the Hork Bajir? Now, with the exception of Aldria from the Hork Bajir Chronicles, they're the first group to really show that much sympathy towards the Hork Bajir. Everybody up to that point just sort of shrugged them off as inconsequential idiots. Perhaps that's a strong word, but that's how it feels. But despite this sympathy that the Animorphs seem to have for the Hork Bajir, they only rarely interact with the Hork Bajir after having saved Jarahami and Ket Halpak, and the only times they do seem to interact with them is when the Hork Bajir deliberately come to them asking for help. And then the Animorphs will sort of say, oh, okay, fine, and help them out in whatever way they see fit. So they're almost... they do become allies, especially towards the ends of the books where they're sort of forced to live with each other. Until that point, they almost seemed like a little bit of an inconvenience to the Animorphs. But Tobias and Cassie, especially Tobias at this stage of the books, were much more in favour and actually went to go visit the Hork Bajir as casual visitors. Didn't happen very often. But I think the real telling moment when we look at the relationship between the Hork Bajir and the Animorphs is when they've got the morphing cube. The suggestion to give the morphing power to the Hork Bajir is barely even considered. It's mentioned and it's immediately shrugged off. They give the power to disabled children instead. They value strangers who are disabled children higher than loyal, fighting, dedicated Hork Bajir soldiers. That puts into perspective how little they respect them as, just in general. They don't even really consider it, they shrug it off. This, I believe, was after the attack on the Hork Bajir Valley, where a lot of the Hork Bajir would have sustained injuries. This was pointed out in Annie Jen's and Earth Diary of Toby Hammy, that the morphing power could heal a lot of these Hork Bajir who had just fought to protect their home. They didn't do it. They didn't allow it. They just assumed that the Hork Bajir were too stupid to be able to handle that power. And yet they're going to give it to human kids. Human bloody adults can't be trusted to look after themselves. At least with the Hork Bajir, they're known to be loyal. And pretty much 100%. Remember that Hork Bajir they're very homogenous, because they were all relatively recently designed. So their personality traits probably don't vary that greatly among the population, and I don't think there's one instance where we see a Hork Bajir not being just loyal as fuck. So that really indicated to me, especially, that they didn't even consider Toby Hammy. That may have been because of the whole Ceros kindness thing. Maybe Axe thought, well, we've already given it to some humans, might as well let some others have it. Don't want to give it to Hork Bajir, but by this point, you go with your best allies. Give Toby Hammy the morphing power, rather than some disabled kids who you don't even know. That, as a battle tactic, or a military tactic, I think is wrong. And, you know, keep your allies on side. It's just... I think the Animorphs are lucky that the Hork Bajir are as loyal as they are, because I think any other group would look at that and think, oh, fuck you guys then. So let's conclude this video with a few little rounded out bits of thought spouting from my head. Throughout the series, the Hork Bajir are often overlooked. They're seen by everybody around them as, in some way, inferior. Despite that, the Hork Bajir throughout seem very optimistic. They seem strong-willed, they're determined and they're persistent. despite everybody just treading all over them. The good guys and the bad guys. And from the few glimpses we see at Toby Hammy's thoughts throughout this series, she knows that the Hork Bajir are just perpetual underdogs. And she even says, after this war, I want to make sure that we don't end up in zoos, because it's obvious that humans have very little... that their perception of us is not great. I mean, she's probably even seen how, or heard about how the Animorphs talk about the Hork Bajir, and she's thinking, these are our allies. What if the whole human population learns about us? They're just going to chuck us in zoos. Let's face it, I'm talking as me now, the human race are a pretty judgmental bunch. Toby Hammy's biggest challenge would have been assuring her race's survival post-war, which is why we see her, I believe, going into a House of Representatives role, basically to be that bridge between her people and the humans. She knows that she can't rely on her supposed allies, because they will just see her as inferior, and they'll always get the short end of the stick. But that's also why she tries to appeal to the Animorphs. Certain sections where she tries to point out how similar the Hork Bajir are to humans. I remember a scene, I can't remember which book it was from, but she's pointing out Hork Bajir, you know, taking care of their kids and, you know, playing fucking throw the rock or something like that. And showing the Animorphs, hey, come on now, we're equal. Why can't you see that we're equal? Why can't we be treated as equals? I think the Hork Bajir were deliberately written to be overlooked 99% of the time, to be almost just sort of pushed down as tools by everybody. It represents a certain group in society that, no matter what they do, are always going to be looked at as just these things. You know, no matter what they do, they will be the downtrodden. Their allies, their enemies, and everybody else will use them as tools for whatever. And I think that's what the Hork Bajir represent, and why they were written the way they are. They're an example of how the nameless and the faceless tend to be the ones that suffer the most at the hands of war, and yet that's very rarely made known. And their suffering is more often than not taken for granted. That is the plight of the Hork Bajir. Thankfully for those green bark-eating buggers, they get the whole of bloody Yellowstone at the end. I'd like to go see Yellowstone. When I do eventually go there, I shall have the Hork Bajir in mind. Right, so that is my sort of half case study, half ramble on the plight of the Hork Bajir. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any other ideas for me about what I can do in these Animorphs videos as we lead up to the Animorphs movie, please go check out, or please give me your ideas. Check out the links in the description, which goes to my fan fiction. I've got a few of these. Also to the Animorphs Discord, we've got over 320 members now, and still growing, still becoming more active, and I have my Twitter page, ThomasHeap91 on Twitter. Right, so let's hope the Hork Bajir are well represented in the upcoming Animorphs movie. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.